Greg is just here to give his talk. We're pleased that he's here. He was one of the very enthusiastic sculptors who came back to us from the first round of working with NISA and really helped us to kind of kick off a relationship with the New England Sculptors Association because we're doing another show with them. We're getting more work next week. So I just want to thank Greg for being so enthusiastic, being such a good sport, and he gave us more oak leaves than he even had to. So we're thrilled that he's here.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to eject this so that way it doesn't bog down my computer. That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Jesse. All right, well, like Jesse said, my name is Gregory Barry, and I am traveling from Ashburnham. That's where I live, reside, and I also teach out there, which is about 35 minutes or miles to the northwest. Yes, so up Route 2 as it travels and meanders up there, just past Leominster, Fitchburg, Gardner, Westminster, up along the New Hampshire border. So we're getting some beautiful foliage, and it's so appropriate that I am here to talk about my leaf sculptures. And thank you for being here, and thank you for having my sculptures here for the past 6-7 months, a little almost. Wow. So this was a great opportunity just to have work out in the community, and it was so lovely, and I just got filled with so much warmth when you all said that you're going to miss them. So I often, when you put work out there as an artist, you don't always get that type of feedback. Sometimes you put the work out there, you go to the opening or the show, and you're meeting other artists, and you don't necessarily have that opportunity to talk to the people who are surrounding themselves with it. So that means a lot to me. That means a lot to me. As Jesse said, well, just a little bit about me. Let's see if we can get this. Oh. Got to be in range, I guess. Got to be in range. All right, we'll just advance. Yay. A lot of writing, but in any case, wasn't sure how much. So down at the bottom, I'm just kind of going to skip down here. I am currently working on my 3rd master's degree. Like, I can't get enough education. I'm also a teacher. So I was born here in Massachusetts, and then when I was around 7th, 8th grade, my father's company said, well, we're going to move you out to the Southwest, and we're going to take you over to Arizona, where you're going to set up as a semiconductor engineer. You're going to set up a plant out there. And so I was uprooted, and I went out west. So I got most of my high school and adolescent education out there. So I was propelled into a big school atmosphere. There was over 2,500 students, where I had come from Hudson, Massachusetts, which was, very much smaller at that point in the early 80s. So we went out there, and then I went to high school out there. I started college, and then the company moved him back. I decided I was old enough. Hey, Dad, I'm going to stay out here and I'm going to start my life. So I was going to Arizona State University at the time, and I was in art, and my father was an engineer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I am the youngest of 9 children. So my oldest brother, I still get to be that little brother and heckle him. So that's a fun role that I've always had. I hold on to that at family gatherings, and I'm kind of like the fun uncle as well. So I met my wife out there. We were studying art and art education together, and we were taking classes. And so from there, we both got jobs in education. I started off in middle school out in Arizona, and after a couple of years of teaching, we had 1 child and then a 2nd child on the way. And we realized that we didn't have a support system, and that was really important to us, and we wanted to move back towards where a family would be. So we came back here to Massachusetts, and my wife was originally from Arizona, so this was a very different place for her. And as a gardener most of her life, she really appreciated the time that we could garden out here. Things could grow a lot easier. There was water. There was a lot of changes in weather. So we had our third child once we were moved out here in Massachusetts. From there, I acquired my first master's after teaching, and I moved to the high school. And that is just a background in education, a master's of education in interdisciplinary studies. And then about a decade later, I decided I needed to further my education. I just felt like I wanted to refresh on some things and learn further about art education specifically. So I got my second master's, which is a Master of Art in Art Education. And about a decade now, I got that in 2011. So now I am working on a Master of Fine Arts, which is more of a studio practice. Where the other ones were more research-based. So I'm in the studio and I'm working using my hands, and that's kind of where we are today. I do some traveling and consulting as a professional development for educators and also for a publication company. So I am currently teaching high school. I've got a portfolio book up here. I can kind of pass it around. You can see some of my work in it. As well as some background information like my CV, which is my recording of my art shows that I've been a practicing artist for over a decade, and I am trying to always get my work out there because once you make it, you want to let it live. You want people to enjoy it, and you want that position of being in sharing. So let me move this forward. So where did the wire sculpture begin? Interestingly enough, in 2008, there was a huge ice storm that hit north central and southern New Hampshire. So this is like some of the shots right outside my house and on my street. The power lines were coming down, the branches were coming down. This was early December. So if any of you recall being in that or hearing about that on the news, we were very much like isolated for about 2 weeks. There were some folks that couldn't get power for 2 weeks, couldn't get down the roads, so emergency crews were helping people out, and my students loved it because they had an extra 2 weeks of Christmas vacation, so that gave them like almost a month off, but it put us really far back in the school year. But as things were getting cleaned up, I was very curious because I saw the bundled wire from all the telephone poles just kind of off to the side of the road. And I had a neighbor at the time that lived up the street who worked for the power company. And I said to him, hey, what are you guys doing with all that material? And he said, well, that's not enough to recycle, that you really can't get any money out of it. So most of it just ends up being tossed. And straight face, instantly I just said, can you toss some of that in my driveway? And he's like, okay, what are you going to do with it? Because you can't use it. You can't power your house or do anything electrical with it. I said, no. I'm gonna make something out of it. I didn't know what yet. I just didn't know what. So, being that I had many trees and I have about 3 acres of property where I live, I just started thinking, and I was talking with my wife, who's an artist as well. And one of the things that I have always been drawn to is the white oak, the lobes, the shape, the natural form, the strength, the meaning, the mythology behind some of it. So I started to work on these little scale models of these leaves. So these are direct scale from leaves that came off the tree in my property. And I use just black annealed wire, and then I have some stainless steel wire for the veins. And that got me thinking about the large electric cable that I have. So at some point, if you wanted to come up later after I'm done talking, you're more than welcome to look at these. And so this is just one example of some of the material that was thrown in my driveway, and currently is, because every once in a while I get a nice little gift. So, and it's short little pieces. Sometimes this just comes off a pole to a house if somebody's burying a line. So there's not a whole lot they can do with it. So I'm going to pass around a smaller piece, and this is what it feels like. So it is insulated with the black, and then the aluminum cable is braided inside. That is the non-insulated. So I get both of those types of wires. And they come in different gauges and different thicknesses. So that's where I thought about, using the black of that wire to create the outer edge contour of the leaf. And then I use the non-insulated aluminum part to be the vein. So I really like that contrast between those two. So here's a little bit of my process. So the first thing I do is I draw them out. I study them. I do some research. And I also have one of my sketchbooks up here. I'm going to set this down for just a second. So I'll go through, and what I do is I have the actual leaf here that I've affixed into my sketchbook, and then I did a photocopy of it so that I could have the coloration of the time when it was picked. And then I do some notes and I do some drawings. I get the scaled outer contour and then the vein contour. So I go through with that, and I did a series of all 10 different oak leaves that I had chosen.
They're not pressed leaves, are they? Are they pressed? Yeah.
One is a pressed leaf. This is the actual leaf right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, yes.
And then this is just a photo. I put it on my Xerox machine and just copied it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's lovely.
Oh, thank you. And then I also, I do some extensive work where I add pages. So there was a book that I did some research with, and found some information about the mythology, a little bit about white oaks and their strength and what they're used for. And then let me see if I can open this up. So then I do some scaled drawings with it. So I used some graph paper, I enlarged it, I took some measurements, and then I do some layering with some tracing paper. I take some notes. So this is part of my process. And the sketchbook doesn't have these long pages, so I'm always gluing things in and creating more space, because there's only so much space in a sketchbook, and I just really like to see everything all at once. All right, so let me put this down, refold this. So that's some of my process, and then once I have the leaf that I'm my choosing, then I take some cardboard, and as you can see in the top left frame, I draw it out and I enlarge it to scale. So some of these are 6 and 8 times bigger than an actual leaf. So I do some measuring, do a little math, grid it out, and then you can see on the top left that I have the wire. It's one continuous wire from the coil. And I just keep mapping it out. I'm bending, I'm using just mostly my hands, a pair of pliers, occasionally a rubber mallet so that I can pound it, and I don't want to damage the casing all too much. So I'm on the ground, you can see me, and I'm pushing and pulling, and I'm measuring all the different components from the uninsulated parts to the insulated parts. Oops, wrong way. And when I get to the stem work, I kind of wrap, and I have this wrapping technique. So the other component is that you've seen the ones on the wall, but I also do ones that are freestanding, that stand out in the garden. I've had installations at the Fuller Craft Museum, and I'll show you some of that work. But also in different places, at the Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Park, I've had some work up there. So these can stand freely. I also have an installation currently in Franconia, New Hampshire. In the downtown, there's a sculpture walk that's up for a year, and they have a culminating show that is on Columbus weekend. So that is a place where there's a number of sculptors up there as well having work. So here's me working a little bit in my garage, after I kind of wrap the base on it. And then as they install, here are some pieces that are just around in some garden areas. I was able to snap a couple of photos. Here I got one of the American goldfinch just resting on it. It's a great addition to our gardens, and anywhere we put these, I've had different birds, different little critters kind of come up on and perch, from butterflies to dragonflies. Birds absolutely love them because you see birds on the wires all the time, so they just naturally gravitate towards that, and it gives them a place to look out and then dive bomb and go get some food and then come back up. So it's really just fun to watch them interact with the sculptures. The other component that I really enjoy about them that was a nice surprise was weather. So with light breezes, they move a little bit. You know, when icicles form on them, just like when you see out on the roads, it adds another dimension to these leaves. The other component too is in winter, these are like the material is made for being outside. So the aluminum, it never rusts. The insulation material, that vinyl that's around them, that doesn't fall off either. So when winter comes around, I mean, when was it, about 3 or 4 years ago, we had that 110 inches of snow. Oh man, that was crazy. So all of my leaves were buried. But it was beautiful in spring because as the snow melted, then they started reappearing and they would pop back up. The wire has a memory. And it was fascinating to see that happen. I had not witnessed that before because we'd never had that much snow since I'd been creating them. So I got that picture up here where they're in the snow as well. And they're just, sometimes they're invisible in the garden where you don't see them, but you'll see just little glimmers of the sun hitting that light. So here is a different installation of suspended leaves. So much like what you've seen out in the hallway by the dining hall, these ones are in a different configuration. So each of my leaf clusters, I try to use different leaves, but I am interested also in how they suspend off the wall. They create really interesting shadows too, and with that lovely track lighting that is out there, I just love the way that looks because I'm really drawn to line. I've always been a drawer most of my life. Since I was real tiny, I'm guessing that if you grew up here in Massachusetts, you can remember on Channel 5 there was a gentleman, his name was Captain Bob. Oh, yes. And he taught me how to draw. He was awesome. I missed those kind of shows. And every morning, I think it was at 5 o'clock, I'd be up before all the other siblings of mine. It was like I had the house to myself. It was like, this was my time. No one was awake. And I would go down and I would put on the television just real quietly. And then I would take out my little sketch pad and I would draw. And sometimes it would be the ocean scene, or it would be drawing, you know, a deer, or he would show you how to draw characters. So I was drawing like my whole life. So I'm always interested in that line and that shape and what those create. So here's one installation. This is another installation that stands freely. So this is called Conversation. I've designed a custom-built pedestal so that these can be supported indoors, as well as you've seen the ones outside. They're real easy. They just kind of stick in the ground. But when I was faced with the challenge of, okay, how do I get these leaves to stand up inside without putting holes in the floor? What can I do? So I built a custom pedestal so that they could insert within there. And I just got to backtrack a little bit because I had started making these leaves and I put them on the wall in my studio and in our house. And my wife, you know, being the avid gardener, she was like, wow, these are great. We got to get these out in the garden. How do we get them out there? And so she goes like, you know, challenge you. You got to figure out a way so that these can stand. So she gave me that nudge and she gave me that motivation to help me out to figure out, okay, so let's do this. And I was able to figure out a way to get them to just pop in the ground, and then it now became part of the landscape. So that same challenge of how do I do that outside, I had to bring that to inside so that I could enjoy that in different gallery shows or different venues. This particular piece is going up in December through July down in Worcester. I have an installation going in a business down in there, so that's pretty exciting for me as well. Here's a detail, but I don't really need to show you too many details because you guys can just walk right up to the piece that's over there. So showing, you know, how I wrap the edges around it, how the veins come together. And on a side note, so I had some material, and one of my leaves was accepted to the Fitchburg Art Museum regional show. And I was approached by them a number of years ago now. I think it was 2012, and they asked me if I would be interested in being a guest artist at their blacksmith festival. So I, of course, said yes, and they said, well, can you create a public art piece so that people could engage with it? And I said, absolutely. So I created this with the help of a friend who did the welding underneath. He created a support structure for me, and I took all the leftover pieces of aluminum wire, and I wrapped and I created this tree. And I only created the tree. So part of my public art project was at the festival, I had created this working space of about 12 different leaf shapes. So everyone who came over could make their own leaf, and then they could attach it on the tree where they wanted it to be. So I had children that were like 2 and 3 years old, and then I had people that were 98, and this one woman, she was 102, came over and she made a leaf and added to the tree. So it was a bare tree when we started, and then it just blossomed with these leaves throughout. And these are what those leaves look like. So I used that idea to then create more tabletop types of sculptures. And the wire are all pieces, these wires all come from leftovers from the larger leaves. So I'm taking a material that had a first life of being, this product that we travel electricity through in order to get from one house to the next house to power our lives so that we can have like light and electricity and we can have television and whatnot. So then from creating a new object, I have more refuse. And from that material, then I create the smaller pieces. So I'm trying to cut down on when things get thrown away and how do you utilize almost every component of a material. Being frugal, that this world has enough things in it that we can use the materials that we're given and that we see around us in new ways. Instead of exhausting resources, we should be more sustainable. So that's a part of my interest as well. So here's the tree. This went on tour. This was at the Fitchburg Art Museum for a year. And then after that, it went to a couple locations, and now it resides in our garden. Here's another different style of work that, again, created from the electric wires. And this was also some tree components that had fallen. So I utilized, the tree that was already dead. And much like these bases for these pieces, all come from trees that I found right on my property. These are really neat, and because it's spalted maple, I just love the way that the spalted maple can pick up the line work. And then I combined it with the white oak leaves. So here on this piece, this is called heartwood because all the pieces of wire come out of the central core of each of those stumps. And this was on a trails, sculpture trails show. And you had to be juried into it and accepted. So I proposed that I took these 3 stump pieces, I did the black around them, they related here. And I just had all these wires coming out of it because I just wanted it to be kind of crazy and have the wires be like energy exploding from this, previously living organism. And then I created this pedestal, and it was interesting how there was suddenly a pedestal on a sculpture trail. So it was taking that idea of a museum and a gallery and putting it outside in the natural world rather than just incorporating that object into the landscape. So I was after something a little bit different for that one. And here's an installation that was at the Horticultural Society in Wellesley at Elms Bank. So I was able to be a part of this show, and these are 365 of these smaller leaves. So I had to create a lot of work for this, and each one obviously with that number represents a day in the year. So it was just a lot of fun to install. So I installed it around this, I think that was a baby maple, elm? I can't remember suddenly. But just kind of like all these little leaves were almost worshiping the one that was actually alive. So having that kind of an installation. Again, here's a couple of leaves as an installation in the garden. In wintertime, another piece. And then just a couple of short little videos of different places. Let's see. Just so you can. So this is at the Fuller Craft Museum down in Brockton. So just how they're coming out of the ground, and over time they'll flop a little bit, so they're not so rigid. Bless you. I want to go back.
Walking, how do you keep people from walking away with them?
I don't, actually. That's a really good question. So far, I've never had anyone walk away with one. But I guess that would be an honor if they were to have one and suddenly oh, I like this, I'm going to put it in my yard. But, it'd be nice if, they dropped me a check in the mail, too. That would, but, yeah, they're that easy to just kind of take out of the ground. But, okay, why? Let's go back. Okay. Let's see, there's another little video. So this is another one called Emergence. And this is on a sculpture walk, and there's 200 of the little leaves on this one. And these were kind of scattered all throughout the woodland area along the pathway. That was a really short video. Yeah, so they're all kind of nestled along this edge. And then let me show you one more. And this is on a third sculpture walk. This one's in Harvard. So I had 6 leaves here, and again, these were, you can see they're almost invisible. And that way they work with nature, and you're not just seeing one stark object that's blocking nature. Just like when you're seeing twigs and you're seeing branches, there's an invisibility to them, but also it allows for little critters and creatures to, especially spiders, they like them too as well. I mean, it's great for them to make their webs and catch food. So here I'm just walking along the path, and we staggered them every so many feet. And this was a really nice spot because we're surrounded by some of the taller trees are white oaks as well.
Do you have these on display near your home?
I do. I have them in my backyard. I have them up on display in New Hampshire, which is in Franconia. So that's about 2.5 hours from here, up past the Notch. Lovely little town. And then it depends, sometimes they travel to other places too. All right.
Did you ever know George Kramer?
No, but the name sounds familiar though.
Well, he did similar things. He'd come into museums and hang things up on the wall, and it was creative.
Oh, I'm going to look him up. Thank you. All right, so, and I also have a website, So I will take you to that real quick, and then I'll show you a little bit of my current work. So here are some of my installations. So there's some of the videos. You've seen that one in winter, another one in winter.
Do you ever make hanging mobiles?
I haven't made hanging mobiles. No, like Calder?
These kind of lend themselves to that format.
They really do. And I've had a conversation with a few people about suspending these ones especially. The hardest part is finding the space. Like a high enough ceiling that, first of all, I can use, because there's not too many places I can do that in. And then finding that installation, so from those leaves I can hang possibly the smaller leaves from. That's a beautiful idea. Mind if I steal that one? That's a great one. Okay, so then some of the current work I do right now is I'm working in a similar fashion with wood. And this is all repurposed and recycled wood. So this is pieces of plywood that has been ripped out of people's homes when they're remodeling. I have several connections and colleagues and friends that do construction work. So I'm asking, I asked them, hey, what are you doing with that material? Right? And they said, oh, it just goes in a dumpster. So I will pull it out of the dumpster, and then some of this material actually started weathering, and plywood, because it's in layers, it would fall away, and I would use those little shards and reaffix them back together. Like this one too, this is a smaller piece. This one is on view right now. I have this one in a show down in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So again, all these are little shards of plywood that I've refashioned together. Here are some dimensional pieces that are a little bit more organic, but yet also having like those little tiny pieces of plywood that came from the bigger ones. I used even the smaller ones to create other pieces. And here's one that's really textural. Again, all these are plywood, little shards. And there are some of the wire leaves as well. So that's my work as it is right now. On my website, I also have like previous work, more traditional two-dimensional drawings, some painting, some photography. But if you have other questions or... Yes?
Do you ever draw faces with wire? Have you ever made faces with wire?
I have, just like for fun on the side, like in my studio, but I haven't done them on a scale that I'm going to present them or of people yet, but that's a really good idea.
I saw some wire sculptures in I think it's the Philadelphia Art Museum. Very minimal.
Yep.
Pieces of wire, but they suggested a face and expressions that were amazing.
Yeah, I think I've seen much of Calder, Andrew Calder, who did a lot of that work, but there's several artists that are contemporary artists right now that are doing work like that. Yeah, and for a simplicity of a line to capture that expression within eyes and within a mouth gesture, I'll have to see if I can do that on a larger scale, like with this material. Thank you. Any other questions? Wow. Thank you so much. You're welcome to come on up and take a look at these if you'd like. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Jesse.
You're welcome.
Do you want this or anything? Or
How do you stick them in the ground?
there's a piece of rebar that I...